Hello, and welcome to the Human Tell podcast. This is the podcast where our category leading insights professionals share a little bit about what we are learning here at Human Tell. And we do this alongside cultural experts who provide additional perspective so that we can all better understand why, why people do what they do. I'm Lolita Morrow, Vice President of Brand Partnerships at MyCode and host of the Human Tell podcast. So, question. Are you a facts and figures thinker, or do stories and visuals sway you more? In this week's episode, we are going to unpack how literal and figurative cognitive styles can influence ad engagement and purchasing decisions, and also what this means for brands that are looking to connect with different audience segments. I'm joined today by two people who are absolute experts in their field. First, I'd like to introduce our Human Tell member, Megan Pites, founder and CEO of Numerius. She's the go to partner for brands that want to make smarter, faster decisions with analytics that are as rigorous as they are actionable. Megan blends deep expertise in advanced analytics with a rare gift for making the complex approachable. Welcome, Megan.
Thanks, Lolita. Great to be here.
How are you doing?
Pretty well. I'm excited.
I am too. This is a really exciting topic. So it's kind of I have my little coffee with me today, so it's going to be very conversational. I'm excited about this.
Same. Cheers.
Cheers. All right, so let's keep this going. So Megan and I are joined by our friend Melina Palmer. Now, Melina is founder and CEO of The Brainy Business. When the world's top brands need to understand why and how people make decisions, they turn to Melina Palmer. A leading voice in applied behavioral economics, she's a 3-time best-selling author and globally sought after keynote speaker. Her podcast, The Brainy Business, has over 1.3 million downloads in over 170 countries. Welcome, Melina. Welcome to the Human Tell podcast.
Hello. Excited to be here.
After reading that, I don't think you're busy at all. You have plenty of time.
you
Best-selling
know, that's
author.
why I have a big coffee, right?
Listen, I'm glad we are all aligned today. This is this is fantastic. I have to keep reminding myself today that I need to talk because I already know I'm going to want to listen to what you both are bringing to the table about this exciting topic. So I need to just sort of pinch myself and say I'm a part of the conversation as well. So with that, I guess let's just get into it. Before we begin, I want to give some background on even why we're talking about this. So our members in the media group at HumanTell really wanted to learn more about how people's different cognitive styles impact the way they receive advertising, and also how this impacts the many different elements that marketers can work with within an ad, things such as tone, messaging, types of information. And so what we were able to do was field a survey among about 4,000 people in the US back in May to sort of glean some insights around this topic. Um, with that set up, Megan, I just love to start with you and just have you sort of share with us. I know you've read the survey and sort of share a little bit about the methodology and what this survey would sort of be informing for this discussion today.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the part that I get most excited about, right? The
All right.
the research piece. So the goal of the research was really to measure people's propensity to process information on that literal versus figurative scale so that we could start to understand how they might respond to different elements of advertising. The ingoing hypothesis was that if we knew an individual's preference for the literal or the figurative, then perhaps we could, predict their reaction to different advertising elements and ultimately build better ads for them, right? So you could imagine if we knew a certain cohort of prospects for our product or service were more literal, then we would play up the facts and the figures in our advertisements. Or if a brand attracted those more figurative, then we could spend more time in the story. And the way that we determined where you sat on this literal to figurative continuum is by forcing you to make trade-offs between different cognitive styles. So in the survey itself, we asked respondents when you process information, do you prefer it to be straightforward or creative and metaphorical? And are you more likely to remember stories and examples or facts and figures? Do you learn new things with step-by-step instructions or big picture principles? I think you get the idea, right? We didn't tell people which one was literal or which one was figurative. We just showed them kind of those definitions, descriptions, and had them pick across a scale which one, better represented how they feel when they're processing information. In addition to that, we also tested out different types of ads. So we would ask people if they connected better with an ad that said, "This mattress includes 3 ergonomic layers of memory foam," versus "This mattress hugs your body like a cloud every night," right? So hopefully you can read between the lines there on which one is literal and which one is figurative. We also showed them an ad that was like, "These headphones keep your music flowing from sunrise to sunset," versus, "These headphones deliver 20 hours of battery life on a single charge." So those were all of our inputs. From there, we were able to take that data and place respondents on this continuum from very literal to very figurative. And it, for a mathematician, beautifully looked like a normal distribution. And then we created 4 segments, roughly of equal size, combining this self-stated cognitive preference and creative preferences. And I know later on we'll get into the who's who of the segments, but in the meantime, if you're curious, we'll flash up a QR code here, and you can actually take a short version of this survey and see where you fall on the continuum. So just take your little phone, take a little picture, and up will pop the short survey. And then you will be placed into one of the 4 segments, and then we'll talk about those here in a minute.
Oh, that's amazing. I love a little quiz. I wish I could take that while we were having this discussion. So, with all of the information that Megan provided, Melina, how important is that to, I guess, consumers and also brand strategists? I can imagine when you are thinking about how you want to approach an ad, um, you don't necessarily want to isolate one group, but you do want to make sure that the message that you're trying to get across is resonating effectively. So, how do consumers sort of, uh, how would they need to lean into that? And then also from a brand strategy perspective, as they're sort of planning out these advertisements, what are some things that they think about as well?
Yeah, it's a really interesting opportunity. So, first, just a little bit for anyone who's not that familiar with behavioral economics as a field, just to share a little bit about the work that I do. Really, it's in knowing that the way that humans make decisions isn't really the way that we would like to think it is. We don't know as much about our brains as we think that we do. And so, when you get into some of those, traditional economic models of like, supply and demand, and people have one price they're willing to pay for things, and like all these rules that come in traditional economics. The real world has shown that many of those don't live true in every situation. And really, humans are not as rational, maybe, as we might like to think that we are. And so, where behavioral economics is really, I just like to say, if traditional economics and psychology had a baby, you have behavioral economics. And so, what we do in applied behavioral economics is understanding why people make the choices they do, why they buy the things they buy, and how you can better communicate with people, either, internal teams or externally to consumers, or even just like amidst your own household, things like that, right? Just understanding our brains and how we make choices. And what behavioral economics finds, just again and again and again, is that the way we present information has a huge impact on how people receive it, right? So I love to give the example, to imagine you were going to get a yogurt parfait, and I'm going to just, like imagine it's your favorite thing, and you go to this restaurant, they happen to have 2 of them on the menu. They are identical. The only difference is that one is listed as being 90% fat free, the other is 10% fat. Which one do you want to buy? And overwhelmingly, people say again and again that they want the 90% fat free version, right?
Mhm.
Logically, we know that it's the same thing, but the way that information is presented has an impact on the choice that we make, right? 90% versus 10% fat. And so taking things like that into understanding when we start to think about how we're going to present information across all sorts of aspects, right? The images that we use, the order in which we present things, how we talk about it, whether it's literal or more figurative, is so, so key if we can know who we're talking to. So, one layer is humans decide in kind of funny ways. But the nice thing is, what behavioral economics has found is people are actually very predictable in these sort of rules in the way that they make decisions, right? And so we can know that actually storytelling is very important in helping people to remember things and being able to make decisions. We do need that emotional level kind of no matter what. But in this like specific situation, when we're talking to someone and we get into these segments, quartiles, what have you, being able to say, hey, most of our people are ones that need a little bit of fact and figure along with their story, or people that are going to need, they really just want to be swept up in the story. And so understanding who you're speaking to, whether that's by industry, by individual consumers, your specific product and brand approach, those things, when you can know that, is so, so important for a business because it helps you to be more efficient and effective in all of the messaging and communication that you have. And everybody wants to be making the most of their advertising dollars. And you make it so that people who are buying from you are ones that, love working with you. They feel like you get them, you see
Mhm.
them. It makes it easier to buy.
Yeah. When I think about the end result of what an organization is trying to do, they definitely need to lean on their consumer insights professionals. And maybe this is pointed more to you, Megan. I guess having this information, um, how can consumer insights professionals, I guess, continue to be better strategic partners in the organization? Because it seems like this information is a key ingredient to sort of the end result of having an impactful ad.
Right. I mean, it's a plus one to everything Melina just said about being able to guide better creative briefs or your media strategy. But even on the insight side or on the UX side, like you can start message testing with more nuance once you understand that there are folks who are across this entire continuum and which ones resonate with your brand best, and designing creatives for your type of consumer, especially in like a cross-functional setting, right? This kind of insight is going to, I think, bridge the gap between that data and storytelling, and allows both the marketers and the creatives to speak a common language, right? There's
Mhm.
nothing an insights professional wants more than to be able to be that thread between, we did this research and here's how you, the marketing team, can take action on it. And what I also think is cool about this approach, for insights folks, is that it's not the typical approach to segmentation, right? We're not using attitudes or behaviors within the product category. We're really trying to hone in on how people think. So it's just something new and unique that I think insights partners will be able to use kind of as a leveling up strategy in their research moving forward.
Yeah, I can see how, it has positive implications for sure. It can really help improve a message's relevance and also the resonance when you're thinking about informing like ad placement. Is this going to be long form? Is it going to be short form? And then, even getting more deeper into the weeds, you think about sort of like even conversion rates. How are we able to sort of align the content to this ad with whatever this user's decision making preferences are? So, just sort of building on that, what we've really learned about people, Megan, can you tell us a little bit more about the difference between people who are more literally inclined as compared to, I guess, those who are more creative or figuratively oriented? Because personally, I can't tell. It just depends on the ad I see. I mean, some I want to cry, others I really want the facts about it. So I'm not even sure where I fall in that differentiation.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a binary, you're literal or you're figurative. Actually, the way that we crafted the segments, if you look at the deck and the data itself, is, as I mentioned earlier, this like beautiful normal distribution. There's, two groups that are on those tails that are going to be, very, very literal and very, very figurative. But 50% of the population is in that messy middle, right? They maybe lean a little more literal on some things, but figurative on others, and then vice versa for the more figurative people and on others. But I think what is really interesting is what is in those polls. So I'll talk a little bit now about what the segments kind of revealed. Some of it will be interesting. Some of it will be like, oh, duh, it's literal versus figurative, right? So we'll start with the oh, duh moments first. By definition, right, the most literal thinkers, the folks that are all the way on, the literal side of the continuum, are going to prefer facts, figures, expert commentary, and that step-by-step logic, right? They're careful, they're plan-driven, and they trust straightforward information. Where the most figurative thinkers are going to gravitate towards visuals, stories, and they're also going to take into account maybe a personal opinion when making a purchase and leverage that like big picture thinking. And they tend to respond to emotion and act more in the moment. So at its core, the literal thinkers want to understand the how, and the figurative thinkers care about the why and, all the feels that come from it. But I don't think any of that is a surprise, as I mentioned. What's interesting to me is where we see differences across the segments outside of those cognitive and creative preferences. So, figurative thinkers are much more likely to be Gen Z and Gen Y, while boomers overwhelmingly prefer the literal. And I want to remind you that even though we're seeing these like age differences, the segmentation itself was really built on the mindset, right? So it's not just about age, it's about the mindset. And we also saw that the most literal folks describe themselves as dependable and careful and organized, while the most figurative over-indexed on being lively and energetic. The most literal were also much more likely than the most figurative to want to analyze information before making a decision. And so they're really starting to like tease themselves out, right? As, literal versus figurative. But again, we have to kind of remember that messy middle. And when we build ads, make sure that we're, leveraging both sides of the coin. So in an ideal world, as a brand, you would know if your customers are more to the literal side, more to the figurative side, or somewhere in the middle. And then if most folks are in the middle, then you're going to want to kind of play up both of those pieces of information. Another interesting perspective is when they were asked about ads and media in general, such as like, do you enjoy watching ads? The most figurative people were actually 2 times as likely to say yes than the most literal people. And they also over-indexed on finding ad content to be trustworthy. So we might have to work harder to find a storyline that appeals to the figurative, but if we can align with what they need, they're going to trust it and potentially take action on it. Where it's probably a lot easier to make an ad for a literal person, but they're going to need, a lot of facts and figures to really, force them to make that decision. And when it comes to the types of ads that the most figurative connected with, about 50% of them said that they needed realistic and informative ads, but more than 70% of the literal thinkers said they needed realistic and informative ads, right? So even the most figurative still also need some literal information. It's just that the very figurative were much more likely to be open to all different types of ads, especially when it comes to like energetic, heartwarming, and funny, right? But the literal folks want that instruction manual, right?
Right.
Figurative thinkers want the movie trailer. So give those figurative folks all the emotions, right? Playful, adventurous, you name it, but make sure that you're still tapping into the literal functions of your product or service so that you don't alienate any folks, because there are a lot of folks in that messy middle.
Right. And I would think that's a lot to unpack, but I would think also, would it depend on, I guess, the product that you're talking about? So, for example, if it's a car ad, right? I would want to sort of validate my purchase and I'm trying to analyze. So, if you're talking about, hey, safety ratings, this is the mileage range, battery specs, I want that information. And then conversely, I guess if I'm thinking about purchasing a sneaker, I'm looking at imagery, like the bold colors, the videos. It just ties into my emotions for purchase. So I also see myself sort of splitting that depending on what the ad is actually trying to sell.
Yeah, 1,000%, right? So I think what's most important to glean out of this work is that, one approach is not going to suffice for every product category, right? I think all brands should try and understand where their customers sit and then create their ad content accordingly. For example, just like you were talking about, right? I've seen healthcare brands succeed with literal thinkers by focusing on the facts and the benefits and the efficacy, right? When doctors make decisions to prescribe, they want facts and figures, versus entertainment brands are going to thrive with figurative thinkers using emotion and metaphor and really drawing you into the story, right? And so I do believe that every category is going to be different, and this is why ad research is so important. I was creeping on the Brainy Businesswoman's podcast the other day, and she had a great podcast with a former host about bad ads, and I thought it was really brilliant and also perfect timing for what we're talking about today. Because if you miss the mark on whom you're talking to with the media that you're trying to lead with, then you're going to have a bad ad, right? Even in the same campaign, if you don't, add a couple of facts and figures and you only lean into the stories and emotional, you might be leaving out some of your folks. Now, you might as a brand choose to do that, and that is perfectly fine, but perhaps you need to create, a second promotion for that group of people for whom you weren't going to attract with the very figurative type of ad. And, the only other thing I want to say in this space is like, I think we've seen this year alone that the most creative ideas aren't always the most effective, right? And that we probably want to test our ads to make sure it's speaking to the right cognitive language of our customers. And so, depending on your product category, depending on your service, if you knew where they stand on that literal versus figurative, I think you can probably create better ads for your consumers to encourage purchase.
Wow. So, Melina, you got a nice plug there. Can you just jump in and share what have you seen in your own experiences, I guess, about these different types of people? I mean, are they really that different?
Yeah. Well, n no, but yes, right? Like, I mean,
Right.
there's always this kind of gray space in there, and thanks for listening to that episode with Jake Teeney, talking about bad ads. That was a really fun one, to do on the show. With this, really, I think what you wanna look at, and building on what Megan was saying, is understanding too that you have a long customer journey, right? So if you consider the experience of buying, it's never just the one add the one moment. It's this series of moments that come together. And, research shows humans make like 35,000 decisions a day on average. And you showing up and people deciding, am I going to pay attention to this, or am I going to keep scrolling through TikTok or whatever? That is a decision that they're making throughout the day. So you need to be appealing at the right moment in the right context. Also, humans shift through various identities throughout the day, and knowing what kind of mindset someone is in, understanding that context is so important with what you're going to present to them at the right time. So when I'm in mom mode is different than when I'm in CEO mode, right? Or when I'm out with friends, or when I'm in my car, like all these things, you're in a little bit different. Or if I'm going to CrossFit versus yoga, like those things, you might be in a different state of mind, and understanding that about the people that you are communicating with is really important. And it might be too, like, I think this is such an interesting conversation, and this like first step into this type of research is really cool because it's able to look at this question. I haven't really seen other research that's been digging into literal or figurative thinkers in this specific way as it applies to advertising. And so I think it's really cool as it starts to tease out and definitely open up more questions, right? So, like, is it that someone who thinks they're more literal is going to want to be seeing these facts first? and then the story comes in. Whereas you're going to hook the more figurative people early with the story, and then you sprinkle in a couple of facts to help them feel validated before making a choice. Like maybe it's about like that order of how you present information and ads to people as they go through a funnel of experiencing your brand before they're going to be ready to buy. And as you said, the journey is different if you're buying a candy bar maybe than if you're buying a house, right? Like that there are more moments that you're going to be interacting with someone, or choosing a streaming service. For some people it might be a quick, yeah, let's try it, right? But maybe for those, more literal, there's a different experience of comparing price points and things like that. At the end of the day, people all are more emotional than they think they are. And that storytelling will always matter, even for those literal brains. Just mountains and mountains of research shows that. And so that's important for everyone to know. And I know Megan and I were talking about this, before recording. Want to make sure everybody knows it's not that you just want to say, okay, we're facts and figures all day, and I'm going to just turn my ad into a manual or something that lists all the numbers. That is not what I would recommend, at least. But being able to know if the people on the other side are going to lean into one aspect more, and again, thinking about that journey, maybe the order of how you present information, and that today we have so much opportunity with pixels and whatever, where we can be following people in ad form in the like hopefully non-creepy way, right? But where you can know those segments in a closer way, and being able to communicate with the Melinas differently than the Megans, let's say, and to know that I should see something like this before I see something like that, and that might appeal to my buying mindset, is something that's useful to know for the type of person, for the industry, for the journey, for the specific brand. Because even in an industry, you're choosing, do we want to be the quality headphones, or are we more value headphones, or are we the high quality streaming service versus the more value streaming service, and thinking about how that would appeal to the people that are most likely to choose you, and they're going to be buying. Like, you think in that value space, there's a real mix of the literal and figurative there that's going to be in that kind of messy middle, right? So on the one side, there's the lure of getting the deal, which is very emotional, but you can't know you're going to be getting that deal and being in that story unless you have some numbers about what the discount is and how much better it is than the other person. Is you're like chasing that emotion with the numbers. And so, there's an interesting balance, I think, for all of it, that every brand has now an opportunity to just start to think about this as you go to set up your own tests. And again, context is always going to matter, and what you think people are going to do. There's a reason my book is called What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You, because, what we like to think about ourselves isn't necessarily true. So, but you can go in and test in the real world and say, if we put this ad, then this one, kind of what happens, right? Do some A/B tests. You can learn a lot, and just frame it around this particular question. If we assume people are going to be more literal, what would happen? Or if we assume our buyers are more figurative and present the information, what might happen? And test it out.
I was even thinking as you were speaking outside of that, when you talk about needs of sort of cognition, there are moments where I can find myself wanting to engage and solve a problem. Like I have a high need, right, for cognition. So I can lean into ads like that. And then there's an ad about a body wash with a man on a horse, and it's just really funny. And it's just simple, it's entertaining, it's easily digestible. And that's exactly what I need. So a lot of times, what's happening in the world can almost dictate what I gravitate towards. So with that said, Megan, I guess without giving up any state secrets here, um, when we talk about response to advertising, sort of what can you share with us about what you've learned in this area from your work across so many various different client groups?
Yeah, really interesting. Before I go there, I did just want to like double down on what Melina said about not going all in on facts and figures, because it's really easy to compete on tech specs or like a list of product features, right? Like anybody can list features or speeds or stats, but that's rarely what makes someone choose your brand, just like you were saying, Lolita, right? Emotional connection is that real differentiator, and it's harder to build, but it's what ends up sticking. So I really think the best strategy when it comes to ads isn't this either or, literal or figurative, right? It's the blending of both of them, speaking clearly to your audience and what they need when it comes to information, but not missing the chance to make them feel something, right? And so I guess that is really my overarching sort of commentary about this work is that we want to make people feel, but also support them with the type of information that they need in order for us to get them to purchase. Because at the end of the day, all of these brands are trying to get us to buy their products and services, right? And so leveraging a tool like this to understand the types of customers that you have, what kind of information they're seeking from you, what type of relationship that they want to have from you. If you can understand all of that, then it essentially becomes a tool to, de-risk those big creative bets. And I'm all in on Melina's comment around A/B testing, right? Like we might even do all this research and come up with the greatest ad possible, but I would still do one more line of research and A/B test that and make sure that our interpretation of what consumers said that they wanted is also in alignment with what they said that they wanted. So A/B testing, but leveraging this, cognitive, creative ad styles, I think is going to set a lot of brands up for better positioning and ultimately, better advertising, which ultimately would increase the bottom line.
So, Melina, thinking about the A/B testing, um, what does research really tell us about really how to communicate with these different types of people? So, when you think about the different boxes, the different cognitive styles, if it's analytical or figurative, it's intuitive, and then sort of those characteristics, it seems like a Venn diagram of sorts. So, from a research perspective, when you're looking at communicating with these different types of people, how can you best formulate that for success? Like, can you get it wrong? Can an ad be just too much and you're trying to grab too many people at one time?
Yeah, I think that Megan and I both had the face there like, oh yeah, and ads do get it wrong a lot. And like no like shame or shade on any brand or advertising team. It's hard because there's so many people, and like I said, what people tell you they want, humans are very bad at predicting what's going to make them happy and what is going to encourage them to want to buy something. And so what they may tell you will sway them in a focus group or something isn't what actually ends up doing the job when you go to actually present. We have things like New Coke, which is the kind of go-to example, from the 80s that did terribly, even though people liked the taste better and they said they were going to want to buy it. But that obviously had a huge backfiring experience there. And now we all have Coca-Cola Classic, to thank in that case. But being able to know some of these aspects so you can be more likely to get things right, and you can be testing on something, like trying to prove something, looking to understand a little bit more about who you're communicating with is really important. And to know that having a null result or having something go completely different than what you expected, to know that that isn't a bad thing, right? Everything is an opportunity to learn. And if you instead reframe, like in behavioral science and behavioral economics, we test small, right? These micro moments, micro decisions. You test often and you just try to change like one thing at a time. So I know in this study, I was really glad to see when I was reviewing, the results and brought in to kind of talk about this, that they looked at where the ad imagery, everything was the same. It's talking about the same sort of thing. The only thing that changed was the text on the message to be literal or figurative, right? And so then it's not that, well, yeah, the figurative one was better, but it also had a different image or it was brighter or all these different things that could have been impacting. Whereas if you just change one thing at a time, you can be able to understand a little bit if it had, that one thing had an impact, and then you can kind of double down and learn more. To get to the some of the research, and I've had so many like thought bubbles, as we've been talking about different aspects of research of where, doctors, where there was something about prescribing that Megan was saying. Actually, some doctors, when you tell them that they prescribe antibiotics more than 90% of the others in their field, they actually prescribe less. Whereas when you told them, hey, you should prescribe less antibiotics, it didn't do anything. So, like, even when we think it should be purely literal, that social proof, that story, and thinking about that social pressure influenced the way that they prescribed medication in a positive way, getting them to change behavior and a habit. When you look at buying a sneaker, like you said, it could be that it's just like, oh, beautiful, I love it, or this is cool, it's interesting. But for a really competitive athlete, it might be about those literal, like the weight down to the point zero zero something, right? It makes a difference for them. And so knowing who you're talking to, in what context, you're not just in a footwear category, right? But it's footwear for whom, in what scenario, who are you focusing on, what do they care about, and in what moment are you communicating to them? And then you can start to shape those messages, and to know that it's not that you can only be one thing in one and that's it, right? So it's not like Nike can't also have conversation for the you know couch to 5K jogger that chooses their shoe because it's rose gold and that seems fun, right? Not speaking from experience or anything, versus a more competitive marathoner or something that's going to choose differently. But you just want to be thoughtful about how that product ties in, where you're messaging, and all these different kind of elements and aspects, because the reality is big brands are needing a lot of people to buy, and they might buy for different reasons, and all those things can still be true about the brand and what it provides, but what it means to me doesn't have to mean the same thing to someone else. And being able to understand and lean on a particular element is important as you look at different people. And then just one more thing as we look at the industry piece, and while it's not in the literal and figurative language, there is some really interesting research that was done by Jonah Berger and team, and he talks about it in his book, Magic Words, which is really amazing. And in having him on the podcast, talking to him about that, looking at abstract and concrete language can have a really good impact. And when people, you're wanting them to feel more satisfied with an experience, feel like they've been heard and listened to, some of that concrete language, which would be more in our literal space, is actually helpful. So in that case, when someone called into customer service, and they were saying they wanted to order a gray t-shirt or something, and you say, oh yeah, we'll have that to you tomorrow, soon, you'll have it soon, doesn't feel like someone heard me. But say, hey, I'm going to go see if we have that gray t-shirt in a size extra large and I'll be back within 10 minutes. Like, okay, you heard me, I feel more satisfied in this experience, when you can get into that kind of more concrete language that someone feels heard, versus more abstract terms that might be, when you're pitching a new product or something, being a little bit more loose and abstract with that can actually do better when you're trying to get someone to, maybe VC funding, someone to invest in a product or service.
So would you consider those examples, I guess, more or different practical applications? So are there other applications that marketers can use? I know that we're considering people's cognitive styles when sort of serving up these ads, but additional applications that marketers can utilize to be successful in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all related, right? So, in the way that we're experiencing a brand and all of the ways that we communicate, you don't get to say, well, our chat function is just totally separate from how we advertise, right? That is not how humans experience your brand. And you want to be bringing everything together in a way that feels cohesive. If it's not, it has unnecessary cognitive load, and you can lose people in that buying process from something that's totally unrelated to the advertising. We were talking about Lego, before we started the recording here. And I like to give an example that if you imagine there's just like a pile of Lego bricks all over the floor, and you say, oh, no, it's a castle. Trust me, it'll look great. Right. But I can't bring that together in my mind. Whereas if it's already built, or I can see the box of what it's supposed to look like and it's in these different packages, you say, look at this beautiful castle. It's made out of individual pieces. That consistency helps, right? So just thinking about your brand in that way and how you communicate. So you do have to think about all of these elements. And by learning and seeing, okay, that works in this customer service context, how might that apply when we think about how we're going to message on Instagram, where someone can then ask us a question in a DM and we're going to then connect them into a person or a bot or a link to a website? Like, how does that all come in together? And as you consider, maybe with those literal thinkers or figurative thinkers, is their experience going to be different if you can get to that level in the way that they would experience you, your brand, and all those unique moments?
So now you have me thinking about Legos now. So
You're
I I
welcome.
I almost see, like, all the Lego blocks as the research, right? So it's just like a pile. Now you
Mm.
can segment them by color. You can put them together here, all the red, the blue, the green, but then the ability to build that story, to build that castle. I think we need to write a book. To
Let's
build
do
that
it.
yeah.
Well, and I was just going to add too, as Melina was talking, right? I think another thing we have to think about is people's preferences also change throughout the purchase journey, right? When
Mhm.
you're in that like awareness stage, you may be craving a different type of information than you're craving in the consideration phase, than you're craving in the, I'm right near purchase and I'm choosing between one or two brands phase, and then also post purchase. Like, what additional information, if you're a subscription or a service company, are you going to continue to need to offer to your customers to make sure that they retain their membership? So this isn't a static sort of piece of information or segmentation. I think it can be applied throughout the entire purchase funnel across all different product categories. And I love the Nike example of the marathoners versus the couch to 5Kers, right? And realizing that Nike built two different products, right, for two different types of people, and then understanding the underlying cognitive and creative preferences for those folks, the marathoners who want to understand the facts and figures so that they know they will race as fast as possible, and maybe the couch to 5K who want some literal data, but it's more figurative and inspiring them to take on that first 5K and that sort of thing. So this layer of, product or category segmentation that I know many of the insights professionals who are probably listening to this podcast are already very familiar with and are implementing in practice in their organization, right? Or with their clients. But then that, Y axis of literal to figurative. And then you can start to see in my mathy brain, this, propensity curve and that sort of thing would be, I think, super valuable. And then layer in that purchase funnel process. Yeah, we could write a whole book about this stuff.
Yeah, I think we have something absolutely to continue on with here.
Well, and just to build on what Megan was saying, that was building on what I was saying, but like as we're kind of getting into this, right? I think it's also important to note where I was talking about identities, right? So for one, let's say today I'm the couch to 5Ker and I'm swayed by the rose gold color on the shoes, and that's going to inspire me to get up and get out there, and I'm not as focused on the literal piece. But maybe I get hooked on running after this, and eventually I'm caring about the literal stuff for my first marathon or Ironman or ultra marathon or whatever, like down the line, and I may care about those literal aspects as this applies more to the context of who I am in this buying process. But in my running shoes, my running gear and things that I'm buying at that point, as I'm that marathoner and I'm caring about, getting, a extra second off my time or whatever it is, I'm really caring about those facts and figures. But when I'm choosing what I'm going to want to celebrate with after and where we're going to go eat dinner, or the, you know, after race chocolate I want to buy or something. You see a lot of people who run a marathon and then go eat donuts or something, right? Like that might be a purely emotional purchase that is more swayed by the like exhaustion and the thrill of that moment. And so I may be buying one thing very on the literal side because of how it applies to that piece of my identity. And the very next thing I'm buying could be very emotional again and more figurative in what's going to sway me in that process. And so that is where understanding the individual matters. And as Megan was saying, there's a bit of the, we have the demographic, the psychographic, and these things, but you don't just get to say, and this is what Melina is. She's always X or Y, right? I am all of these things in different opportunities and mindsets. And so knowing that you can't just say Melina is this and that applies across the board, but you can say we're looking for people who are like Melina that are in this particular mind space, and knowing that they won't always be buying this thing, but in this moment, this is what we're trying to communicate for people that are going to resonate with this. And we think most people are going to fall in a figurative bucket at this point of how we're looking to inspire them, right? That is something you can start to look at as you look at that messaging, and then can say, and once they've gotten to this point in our customer journey, like if you're Nike with the shoes, then we're going to message in this way. And I might move from spots, but the messaging may or may not change kind of around me, but it may hit me different based on where I am ready to receive it or not.
Right. So as we think about pushing this work forward, and I know we're getting towards the end of our discussion, Megan, are there ways that all of these amazing insights can be brought through into other advertising research? And if it can, then are there specific benefits of doing so, of bringing that into other types of research?
Yes, I think the biggest piece of it is the mindset, right? So, leveraging this data to realize that people are on this literal to figurative continuum, and then trying to understand in which mindset are we trying to attract customers. And so, if we're in that, pre-planning phase and, high level launch, and we just want to garner excitement, then maybe we want to be talking to people who are, figurative. And then maybe if we're at that, go to market and we've uncovered that the highest probability customer is that, marathon shoe buyer, then maybe we want to be more literal in those circumstances. But I think it's just being aware that people have different mindsets in the entire purchase process. And in those different mindsets, they have a different propensity for literal versus figurative information. And that the best campaign probably has multiple touch points that spans that entire literal versus figurative space. And if you're in the healthcare space, maybe you lean more heavily on literal. If you're in the athleisure space, you lean more heavily on figurative, or depending on your brand. But by doing this research at the category level or your specific product level, I think will give you that beautiful understanding of the entire landscape and what types of ads you need to create for all of your customers. And you don't have to service everybody. You can select, that very niche group of people and make sure you hit it perfectly. Or if you want to shoot a little bit more broadly, especially in that like higher purchase funnel phase, then maybe you do create multiple ads that sort of span this literal and figurative. But understanding consumer mindset is super powerful if you want your brand to win in this space.
Absolutely. Melina, do you have any closing thoughts to add?
I would just, I guess, say like reinforcing a lot of what we've already been saying here, that what I really love about this is this opportunity to get curious and to ask more questions, and knowing that for every brand at each moment is really an opportunity to consider, how might this work for us, right? And to look, I cannot stress enough how important it is to do testing within individual organizations and in those moments. And I know it can feel like, well, we'll test next time, or this should work because we heard about it. Run a very simple A/B. Like there's so many tools that make it easy to be able to do. But if you do know this question of saying, hey, let's just see, right? Let's see what we find here. And you can learn something that can help you to be just that, like, 1% better in the next thing that you're going to be putting out there. And just it's going to be helpful all across the board. And I think that this literal figurative question is one that is just really ripe for opportunity to start to investigate in those customer journeys and segments. And so I'm excited to see what everyone does building on this really interesting research question, and being able to see this start to get applied throughout, everyone from Humantel and beyond.
Absolutely. Hopefully everyone got a chance to take that quiz, and we're going to look at ad campaigns very differently going forward and how they're tailored to the many different cognitive styles and the many different various industries, and really help messaging and format so they can be aligned, because the end result is really maximum engagement. So whether you prefer logic, data driven decisions, if you're more of a big picture emotional thinker, if you're a visual learner, if you love storytellings or captions, all of these are ways that insights and research can really help advertisers reach you in the most effective way. So that will do it for today's episode of the Human Tell podcast. I want to thank you, Megan and Melina, for really sharing your perspective with the audience. I love these conversations because when everyone turns on their television or scrolls on their phone, they're going to start looking at ads and assessing themselves a little bit differently. So I also want to thank all of you who came by to listen today. We really hope today's conversation gave you, something to think about. Now, up next for the Human Tell Media Group is going to be an exploration of how people's attitudes towards artificial intelligence, privacy, and trust are changing the advertising experience. And on our upcoming episodes of the podcast, we're going to take a look at how consumers think about their relationships between food, climate change, and sustainability, as well as ways in which the political, economic, and social instability is constantly affecting people's mindsets around travel in 2026. That's going to be a doozy. So if you enjoyed today's podcast, which I know you did, please like and subscribe wherever you go. Get your podcast to keep learning about why people make the choices they make in food, sports, travel, and more. And we'll be back next week to share a little bit more human intelligence from our community. So until then, stay curious. Thank you both for joining us today, and I'm sure we'll be in touch.